All right. Good evening. I was about to say good morning. We usually run these in the morning, but good evening. Uh, Late evening, Eastern Standard. Everyone is welcome. We are at the largest, fastest growing, and the most active uh, meetup or community of large-scale Scrum. This one is New York City based, but it's global, really. Today we have we have seen Jim a lot, but I'm gonna introduce him once again. James Carpenter. Thank you very much for joining. James is the certified LeSS coach and trainer. He's out of Central Time Zone. I keep forgetting you're in.
I'm in Milwaukee currently.
In Milwaukee,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he's a big traveler, so he's pretty much anywhere. And he will be partnering up with his friend, network buddy, colleague, COVID name Mitya. He will introduce Mitya in a second, and they'll take us through a large scale Scrum case study at a very large hardware company, and they will give us more content on that. So I'll pass it on to you, James. With that,
Thank you, Gene.
take it away.
Been great, getting to know Gene better, working with him some. So this is a case study that was I'm one of the newer LeSS trainers, and this is the case study that I wrote as part of becoming a LeSS trainer, and it deals with a large, thousands of engineers that are developing a product that is a compute network storage product on a forklift, basically a data center on a forklift. And I'm fortunate to have one of the key directors involved here is Mitya. You want to say hi, Mitya?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Mitya's become a very close friend. I'm wonderful to have him as a friend. And most everything we did there, he and I did hand in hand. So you don't just get to hear what I have to say, just some consultant. You get to hear what the client actually thought and said. Most of, for the sake of anonymity, we're using Mitya's case study name, and I can't say a whole lot about him other than this is a very hard-hitting, very senior, director level engineer in the hardware firmware space, and much of what we were doing was low-level BIOS development. So very much down in the weeds, and it had a large span to it. Mitya, you want to say anything more?
No, I'm actually here just for the introduction. I like listening to you introducing. I think as we go into it, you'll hear more about my experience with James and what he's been able to do to the team that quote unquote knew that they shouldn't do less and ended up fully adapting it. Yeah. Thank you again for including me in these meetups.
Thank you. The case study itself, you will see that I copied into the chat so that y'all can have it, and you probably want to put this up and go along and read along as we go. Put this on an extra monitor. If you have an extra monitor, put it on the side. This is I'll put it in the chat again for anyone who showed up new. This is the case study that we're going to cover. We're mostly going to just walk through the figures. And my intention here, there's sort of three major themes that happened. There was a great diversity of product development. So some of this was hardware development on prototype hardware that you never knew if the problem was the firmware or the hardware. Others was low-level firmware, sometimes assembly, usually just short of assembly, but no operating system, very much down in the weeds. Other types of software was basically middleware. It happened to be managing something that they thought they were doing firmware, but the truth is it was stable hardware orchestrating a large federation of things that could have easily been, in another space. It would just be normal middleware. There's a lot of power politics that are in play, and we'll go through those. And then we'll talk about how we incrementally did this onboarding. Now, I'm going to go through this as fast as I can because the real value is in Q&A. And so I'm going to walk through the key figures and explain them. And then as fast as possible, we'll get to Q&A, and I'll try to be quiet and let Mitria handle most of the questions, and I'll help when it makes sense. Okay, so let me go through the figures here. I've got them. First off, the product here, as I explained, this is a server infrastructure on a pallet. At the very top, there is this MCS administrator aspect, which is basically middleware running on pretty stable hardware. It's sold as a network device, but it basically is it's sold as a network device like a TiVo might be, but it's basically stable hardware. Then there's a blade chassis that has a bunch of check blades in it, as well as a chassis controller. Again, you're getting a little bit lower level. And then, down here, there is the network storage. A lot of the time that we spent was actually in the blade itself, where you have prototype hardware from prototype chipsets from Intel. And sometimes the bugs in the chip, sometimes the bugs in the firmware code. A lot of the BIOS code you get comes from a third party. And so you're actually making customizations on top of that. It wouldn't be that different than, say, making kernel modifications inside of Linux. You would still be on top of some version of Linux, but then you would be making some of your own customizations within that, and you'd have the source code for all of it. But even this other hardware, the NIC might be prototype NIC, it might not be, it varies. And there are hardware generations that are out in the field. This is not unlike a phone in that regard. And much of what we focused on was the end developments. But the product as a whole is really this whole thing. That's what's deployed as a thing. I was there about 16 months, and there's a timeline, which is that's figure 2, if y'all choose to follow that on the. I did stand up an initial diagnostics team, which was kind of a proof of concept, single team, proper feature team, cross-cutting. I'm not going to focus on that much tonight. It is covered in the case study. And its feature team adoption map is fairly vertical. So it's a pretty good slice. And here's the happy team members. Here's a definition of done they used. This team was working in a context where they indeed did have people they needed to touch everything, but other teams were still effectively component teams. Okay, so at some point, after I was there a few months, I finished up with the diagnostics team, or I was getting to a good point with them, and I got to know Mitya, and Mitya was managing the BIOS, the custom BIOS development, and later we can ask more questions on that. But what he and I started with is we stood up an initial team, or initial set of teams rather, and that focused on the BIOS, and then we slowly grew our way into increasingly cross-function, increasingly cross-component, more of towards a proper feature team. In practice, it became more of a multi-component boundary that we eventually would have stretched all the way into a true feature team. So we were stretching ourselves over time. This is the feature team adoption map for that BIOS group. When we started, or before we did anything, people were working in very narrow silos. There might be one person across 30 or 40 people that knew how to tune the memory access, or knew how to do one little thing or another little thing. So it was almost down at the individual file level that they had compartmentalization. So simply to move to the initial boundary we did within BIOS, even that was a stretch for the team. because they were now working across subcomponents of BIOS and multiple files that they had, historically been very narrowly focused. It's not completely fair to them, but it's largely fair. And over time, we tried to expand that boundary greater. So dealing with the power politics of the situation, when I started, I came in, and the first meeting I ever had with the senior vice president, and there's probably 2,000, like 4,000 people here at that time that are reporting, that are under the red, that are reporting up to him. There's only half a dozen of the green people, and this field support division, which relates to diagnostics. There's only a handful of people that mattered, even though there's an army of people that are actually in the field, thousands of people in the field, but the ones that I interacted with was a small number. But several thousand engineers, the SVP, the first time I sat down with him, he explained to me, James, the real question is not what you can do for me. The question is, how can I help you? And it was extremely clear to me. He made it very clear that if there was any problem I had, or anything I needed, I was to come to him and he would help make this happen, whatever it was that was needed. And, extremely supportive. I could not be more appreciative. I was brought in by an individual who's Trent in the case study, who Minty and I are close friends with, or good friends with anyway. Definitely support there. All the green stars were very supportive of what we were doing. But what's interesting is we had some very passive aggressive behavior by the SVP here, the software VP. And the software VP, for context, was in charge of all the stuff up here in the MCS administrator. The stuff that was basically middleware. And this was the person that was most resistive to the idea of doing something like LeSS, which we weren't actually doing LeSS by name. But doing something, building proper feature teams, anything of this nature, the person who was responsible for the teams that were most conducive to that was the most resistive. Whereas in hardware, which in theory was hardware, but in practice was a whole lot of firmware that was a lot of software in itself, there we had great support. And Mitya had worked with the hardware VP in the past and was basically given carte blanche. Well, if in your judgment you think that makes sense, he could do it. Now, people ask me, what's the one thing that I would change? Well, the one thing I would change is I would not have 3 months later lost my SVP that was so supportive. So now I had someone who was sort of passive aggressive. Sorry, not passive. So we had someone who was neutral. So not passive aggressive at all in the SVP role, but simply not helpful, not just neutral in behavior. And neutral was almost the same as, against it. And yet, due to momentum, we still made a lot of progress. And now, towards the end, and you'll see it on the timeline, the hardware VP resigned, and there's a bunch of layoffs. There's a greater context there. And everyone that was in hardware started reporting to the VP that was passive aggressive. And as you can see, the SVP was still the neutral behavior person. And so this changed dynamics quite a bit. So there's this greater political game that's going on at the same time that all this adoption effort in the case study is happening. And that's relevant. And lastly, if we want to talk about the rollout, what we ended up doing is using the hardware version as a boundary. So previous generations of this product going to production, they're out there in production and they have problems because they were built under a waterfall model, and that's going to have problems. And so we let the teams that were not part of this new effort, we let them keep working on the old production code. But the new hardware, that was being developed by these teams under this new structure. And then over time, we slowly expanded, and everybody in green here on the first two, initially, they're all reporting up to Mitya. So we have the buy-in to make that happen. It's not until we get to India where the reporting relationships are different, as you can see here. That we start to have people that are not under that new structure that we're incrementally rolling out. I think as far as a really rapid overview, this feels a little different than ones we've done in the past, but that's okay. Yes, and that code base that was being used, that was being worked on, especially once we stopped doing this little dirty trick of initially they were forking the code base with every new version of the hardware. And we knew that wasn't good, but we used it to our advantage. But eventually we had people under an old structure and people in the new structure that were touching the same code base. And we had vastly different definitions of what good looked like. At this point, I think it's better to stop. Well, before we go to QA, let me see if Mitya has anything to add, and then we'll just go to QA.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think technically, probably, I think we covered everything, everything pretty well. I mean, you know, there's a lot of details, of course, which maybe we get to them in the questions, like you said. You know, you covered the BIOS code, which again my team was responsible for. You know, there's a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge, I think, that we had, as you mentioned, was silos within the BIOS team, and silos within the BIOS team caused us trouble in migrating from one CPU architecture to another CPU architecture, caused us unnecessary cycles of doing the same code over and over again, integrating our code into the third-party BIOS code that we received from our BIOS company. You know, a lot of this was solved. Actually, all of this was solved really with us adapting the agile methodology, with James spending a lot of time with us, training the team, being with the team as we kind of were, besides the formal training, we're being also trained not only by learning, but by doing, traveling with me and without me to Portland office, and again, spending a lot of time here in the office, facilitating and helping and resolving issues and being in the middle of all the conflicts and all the things that came up, and completely restructuring the way what do people do when they show up to work. Really, all of that was redefined, restructured, and you know, from behaviors to technical approach to work, to scheduling, to how do we deliver, how do we answer to the other parts of the business unit, what by when. I can probably go on and on, but maybe we get to questions first and then see what else comes up.
That sounds good to me. Anybody want to queue a question? You want to queue a question, Gene? Oh, let me do an easy one. Where was Mitya?
Yeah, folks, it's best if you just shout it out.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Here's Mitya. It's right here. Put it up to hardware VP. I'm hanging off here. I'm hanging off Trent, but it doesn't really matter. That's not where I'm working. I'm working with everyone down here. Yeah, whoever wants to ask a question, let's go off mute and let's ask.
Okay, I'll go first if nobody else wants to start. What was the most efficient way of dealing with those power plays?
Dealing with what? With what?
With those power plays, whatever you had this, power structure, and what was your the easiest way to deal with it?
I'm going to let Mitty answer this after I do, but it's kind of like, what do you do about the weather? There's a big storm. you can't do anything about it. You just live through it and try to survive. It's so a thunderstorm happens, a hurricane happens. You don't stop the hurricane. You can't. So, Mitya, you have anything?
Yeah, I think going with this weather analogy, at least what we did, I don't know if that's advice what to do, but what we did, and some of it worked, I think, is that when the power climate was good, we went all in on doing what we wanted to do, and this including, I think you have to. I have to paint the picture correctly. That we started with James knowing everything and we not knowing anything, except the fact that we shouldn't be doing agile because we're this kind of a specialized firmware close to hardware kind of a team. And so we, from that, I don't know, a few months maybe, James, right? For a few months, we went through training. We went through splitting the team into smaller teams.
And we did that in a few weeks.
Properly.
I mean, once I got you on board,
okay, a few weeks. Okay.
It took me. We had to do 2 cohorts in San Jose, so that took. We did that in a week, I think, and then, or I did it in the first part of 1 week, and the second cohort the next week, and then I flew up to Portland and we got that cohort done. And I think in the course of 2 weeks we had three. I had to run 3 courses that were only 2 days each. That's what happened. One of the weeks I did like a Monday, Tuesday, and then in one city, and then a Thursday, Friday in another city. So these were only 2 days trainings. And so in the course of 2 weeks, we had everybody trained. The following week or week and a half, we did the launch activities as a group. And then we were up and started. So probably 3 weeks total from Mitya says we want to do this Mitya says we want to do this, and we've lined up everything, and the calendars are all synced. And 3 weeks from push the button till the engine is running, not running well, but
right,
running.
Yeah, and so a lot of hard work started then, right? After we started with Kasia, I hope it may sound like I'm diverting into something else, but really the concept here is that we went all in on this while nobody, while we had the permission from the hardware VP to do what I felt was right and what James felt was right. And being in waterfall model, or everybody was operating in waterfall model, we had a number of months before somebody asked, okay, where's my monolith? Mm-hmm. Where is everything we're going to ship so we can do the 6 months QA cycle, and then you fix all the bugs, and we celebrate all the bug count and tell everybody that the quality is good because the bug count is high, and we fix the bugs and we do regression cycle and we ship. So before all of that, we went before somebody even asked the question, where's my stuff, where is the whole thing, we were up and running. So maybe that's one way we dealt with this kind of a partial unfriendly power dynamics.
Yes, and Mitya, the other thing I think it's interesting is about the time you and I started this is about the time that this change happened in the SVP, that we got the new SVP.
Yeah.
But that's so high up. Remember, there's like 3,000 or 4,000 people here. So they're dealing with stuff up here while Mitty and I are proceeding with the momentum that we already had. So to some extent, my budget is still approved for me to be flying back and forth every week, and Mitya is still, going forth and supporting the new BIOS, and there's stuff going on up here, but they haven't figured out what they're going to do yet anyway, so we just keep moving.
Yeah.
And the behavior here is not against us, it's just neutral.
And it's I wish I could take all the credit for keeping moving, but I think really a lot of credit, maybe most credit, goes to James for he kept pushing us forward. There's
I don't know
a lot
about
of times, a lot of times on our way we could have got stuck and who wants to get together every 2 weeks, and then not everybody in the team wants to speak. We have to do this retrospective and these sprint reviews and all of that, right? So
but you wanted it, Mitya. If you didn't want it, we wouldn't have got anywhere.
Yes,
I was just there to remove impediment. I mean, I was just there to give counsel, but without you, we couldn't have done it.
So going back to that, the how do we deal with the power climate? So that was the first phase, right? While everybody in the waterfall model is in their own corner, building up the monolith, we're building slice by slice shippable product. And so for a while, we were very comfortable. And then the waterfall side of the business started measuring things. So if there was a QA team that now was integrated in our team, actually, each our Scrum team had a QA engineer. Sometimes their management may come and say, well, how many bugs did you file? Show me the bug count. Well, I didn't file any bugs. Why didn't you file any bugs? Because I'm part of the Scrum team, and when we see bugs, we fix them. And we don't have bugs because we close and we have definition of done and everything is in shippable state. We only file bugs if something falls off and we decide to postpone it and maybe fix it if it's outside of the category of done. And so that started happening sometime later, maybe 6 months later or so. And then we had to deal with educating. Of course, we educated people. People knew what we were doing, but it's not like we did things. We actually did things in very much open environment, open office, and everybody knew and saw that we were doing different things or things differently. So the other side of that, power dynamics of not all the management and the BU being on the same page, was that it required kind of constant management of managers. Explaining and managing of schedules. When we deliver our things, and when the rest of the waterfall, the rest of the group that operates in waterfall needs certain APIs maybe, or certain things that they depend on. So it became more tricky then. And hopefully that answered your question somewhat.
Thank you.
But it was certainly back to James, and James used an analogy of weather. There was certainly those times that it's a hurricane, and I don't just keep just keep doing what we're doing, managing as much as possible. Do go in for safety, but at the end of the day, the weather's the weather.
So something interesting happened here. So these teams that were under Mitya, both in Portland and as well as in San Francisco area, they were using that new improved definition of done, that they were constantly evolving their definition of done, and they were putting additional automated testing in place. Every team had testers on the team, and even though they formally reported through the testing portion, the testing related VP, in practice, they were just another team member. And in fact, they sometimes did development and they sometimes did testing, and vice versa. Sometimes the developers did testing. So, you know, it was very much a cross-functional. There was no them and us. It was we are a team and we do what we need to get stuff done, to committing to that quality standard. But as when India started wrapping up the multitude of bug fixes on the previous generation of hardware, and they started to become free, they eventually started to work on this code base that basically the teams under Mitya had to themselves for about 7 months. And when they did, because they had, even though we had some buy-in from some of the managers that are like first level line managers there, and some of the engineers, we had the buy-in. The problem is we had a director who was very much thinking old school that was in India that they were reporting to. And it's like, you know, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? You just need to be code complete. You don't need to be, you know, properly done. And they start to check in code that causes problems, breaks the build, does all kinds of usual stuff. But what's interesting is because the teams that are working under Mitya have started to put all these quality standards in place, they've started to put the automation in place to some extent. We built out our own CI server infrastructure because the official one was next to impossible to get changes made to. So we kind of had a ghetto custom one. But the teams that were under the new structure started socially pushing back on the people that were putting in bad code. Now, they weren't bad people. They were just doing what their structure was asking them to do. But some of what happened isn't because Mitya and I did it. It's because we had reached enough critical mass and they put a little bit of automation in place, which doesn't matter unless people want it, because you can work, or you can game any automation. I've never seen automation that's not gameable. Automation's just a helper. Really, it fundamentally, does the team commit to quality is what matters, regardless of what the automation does or doesn't do. But the team, like the senior engineers are calling and having conversations with the senior engineers in India and saying, you just can't do this. This is just, you know, we're not going to let this come in. And they'd back out the changes and they, you know, slowly talk through it. Mitty and I were getting ready to go take a trip to India, but then some layoffs happened and we realized it didn't make sense to go, and that's another story. But had we not lost our VP, we had basically driven this to crisis, this quality thing to crisis. And what would have happened is Mitya and I would have gone to India we would have done, I've gone a second time, and we basically would have done a, you know, shuttle diplomacy, and we would have gone over there and tried to bring this person along and hopefully would have done so. But if we didn't do so and we weren't unsuccessful, we eventually would have gone and talked to that hardware VP, and they probably would have all reported to Mitya after that. So we were set, although we did not have the buy-in from day one to say, let's just have all these people report to Mitya or someone who wants to do this in the first place. And if this person doesn't want to do it, this director, let's just get rid of them or move them around. We were able to make enough progress in our little bubble. And then we delayed that problem until we had enough political momentum that we could deal with it, except then we lost our person. Anyway, yeah, let's do the next question.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This is great. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. And I think I have a simple question, but maybe tell me if I'm not being clear. Who defines the measure of quality in this? Who says this is the quality that we need to achieve?
The team.
And I guess I do mean which person on the chart, but I really mean if that person isn't the customer, who is it, and where's the customer's perspective?
Mitty, you want to take this?
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good thanks. It's a good question. As James was about to answer, and the simple answer is that the team defined it. The team defined it, and you might say, how can that be? Didn't you, as an organization, had quality? If I see you raised it, maybe you raised the hand.
Yep.
Again, or yeah, go ahead.
No, that was me.
Okay, previous. Okay.
Thanks.
We before this we were operating in the waterfall model, and I think most waterfall models are similar. I don't know if all organizations measure how many bugs are found. Each cycle you go through software development, how many bugs you find, right? And if one time you found 100, another time you found 5, well, maybe you haven't found all the bugs, and so that's how it's dealt with. Of course, ultimately you measure quality by customer found issues and customer satisfaction. So in this case, the team and James guided us to that. So James guided us to this concept of you want to have a definition of done. You want to have a clear definition of that every member of every Scrum team will know this is when we're done with the user story. And so we got together with the team, as we did many times at the beginning and throughout the process too. But at the beginning, we've had a lot of these sort of whiteboard or sticky board sessions. And we came up with this. And even though this is written in my handwriting, it's just my note taking of what the team wanted. And actually, to be honest, sometimes I didn't want to be as aggressive as they wanted. For example, this line number 8, I would have stopped at 1 and 2 severity, 0 severity 1 and 2 bugs, and they said no. Severity 3 bugs are still things that we have to fix before we ship most of the time. Sometimes, the product teams talk themselves into deferring into different release and so on. But most of the severity 3 also has to be fixed. So they said no, we don't want to call things done and then revisit later. We want severity 1 to 3. So as James, back to the simple answer, this came from the team. So
thanks. And who defined what the word works means? And and where I'm coming from is, it seems to me that would be defined by the customer. So, and I know I don't, as you're telling, in the way you're telling the story, the customer is not a character, not on the org chart. So I'm sure that's just off somewhere else. But I'm curious, who defined the word works and where is the customer in this? Thanks.
So I think this is a very interesting question. And what's interesting is that, like, in this facet is, there's a lot of cases where someone is building like an insurance or a claims processing product or something like that. And you have these people on the business side that are the domain experts of what good looks like. And you have to do a lot of knowledge transfer between the people doing the work and the people who are the domain experts that are the users and the customers. But there's other cases like that are just, it just has to work. Like, what makes for a good car? Well, the truth is, a good engineer, a good mechanical engineer, they know what a car is supposed to do. They know better than the customer what, accelerates well and stops well and turns well. Whereas for a customer, that's a vague concept. I would imagine that a lot of mechanical engineers can tell you that in terms of various physics equations as to what good and bad is. In the same way, what are the objectives of nuclear fission? And the answer is we want to produce more power. then the thing consumes to run by a significant factor so that we can make, power on the grid efficiently. It's a well understood problem. The solution is not well understood, but the problem is well understood. In this example, although there's a little bit of new functionality with each new blade, the truth is that the new blade needs to go into a chassis just like the one before it and the one before that and the one before that, and it needs to implement all the protocols that the previous generation did, and it needs to work. And there may be another 2% of new functionality, but basically it needs to do the same thing that it used to do, but with the new hardware. So the interface is well defined, and the people who understand it best are actually the people that are doing the work. So it's not like some other types of development.
Thanks. This is very helpful and interesting, and I'm going to yield the floor because I don't want it.
Okay. But, by the way, that's a half truth that I told you, because if you talked about this at a proper product boundary, when you get the product boundary up to here, there are more nuances one could talk about.
Yeah,
but we weren't
for sure.
expanded that far. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. I think the boundary concept is a very helpful way to identify the scope and recognize there are other scopes. Yep, thanks.
There's other scopes. And we actually had what's called a fake product owner. Mitria was acting as a fake product owner because we didn't have a good enough slice. Our intention was to eventually get it vertical enough and hand off product owner functionality, or at least area product owner functionality to, where did it go? To someone in the green people, right? The green people's where it belonged.
Yeah.
But we couldn't do that because it was so technical mumbo jumbo that from the green people's perspective, the light turned green. But that's because the boundary was messed up. And yet it was as big as we could get under the remit that we had.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next question.
I just want to add something quickly for the word works. Right, that was part of the question, and it's kind of I would say a shorthand for whatever. So we have James explained number of platforms, number of blades in this case. Everybody isn't sitting in front of all of them developing and testing. Just by nature of prototypes and so on. Some may have one, some may have another. Different flavors are spread throughout the team. And so all the tests, whether manual or automated, the nature of this code is not very conducive to, it's not very easy to automate. And so some with manual, some with automated. Basically works on all platforms means that whatever you did on your own platform that you have your hands on, please go do it on all platforms, get access to all platforms and verify that it works on all platforms.
Great.
That's
Thanks. Bonus question.
Question or two.
What would the waterfall people say? Where would the waterfall people say the definition of quality live? And we can skip that if there's other people who want to ask.
Wait, I think the answer is maybe short, quick answer. Is the product in shippable state really is defined by number of bugs outstanding. So James, if you go back to the definition of done, our definition of done.
Great, thanks.
Go back to one.
The
one
simple one. Yeah.
Okay, this one, yeah. This is I don't want to go line by line, even just to kind of refresh my memory if all of them fit, but certainly a lot of these are very close to the final quality check before shipping the product. Now the difference is that this is the quality check for every sprint, every story, right? And in a waterfall, if a version of this exists that is checked against at the go no go meeting with many people and everybody involved in the project.
Right. Thanks.
Next question. I guess you're up again.
Yeah, folks, do not hesitate. We got only maybe 10 minutes, 8-10 minutes remaining, so make the best out of it.
Oh, there's the easy answer. By the way, one of the questions was what training? I was just giving him basic Scrum training over 2 days. It wasn't anything certified or anything of that nature. But we definitely covered, definition of done and taught him to build sprint task boards and taught him fundamentals of the real thing. So.
And hi,
I would also just, Jonathan, just one second. I just want to add to what James said about the training. Just from the other side, not from James is the coach and a trainer and practitioner. We were just we were learning, but even the first training, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people in the team, at least the way James delivered it, immediately told people this is something new, this is something better. Not 100% of the team, certainly, but for a lot of people, this was the training itself was a good sign. Sorry, Jonathan. I interrupted you.
My question actually going to be regarding training, right? You as an agile coach, usually, what percentage of your time do you spend on training or teaching about Scrum?
So it depends on the phase of the moon. It depends on the time.
And
so,
on the time, right?
So when I'm first, so if we only focus on BIOS and we ignore the diagnostic stuff, so I spend a lot of time having one-on-one conversations with Mitya, bringing him along, that is to say with management, bringing management along to the point that they want to do something, okay? So that's that. Then there is, okay, we've decided we're actually going to change structure and do something new. So you prepare to take everybody that's going to be part of this new structure or that potentially will be part of this structure. Ideally, you'd want a volunteer type situation. But they'd want to know what they volunteered for before they said yes, right? So not that we did that. But that would be better. So then I'm teaching them formalized classroom instruction. And since I could only do about, 25, 30 people at a time, and I was only doing 2-day training, but there were so many people, it took 3 rounds to do it, right? In 2 geographies. So that meant for 2 weeks, I was doing training, right? And then I kind of sat down and let them do the launch activities, but I'm still in the background kind of coaching. And when, there's some question, I'll stand up and I'll talk for 5-10 minutes and explain some concept, but then I'll try to diminish my public presence so that they're the ones doing it. Now, then we'll get to, and they'll get going, right? Throughout the sprint, I might be sitting with the team. I might be sitting with individual developers, maybe pair programming of a sort and teaching them this, that, or the other. I might be sitting in a room with a handful of people that are refining some product backlog items. We did a lot of that. And again, that's talked about in the case study. Initial product backlog refinement. There was some workshop brainstorming activity that we did. I was in the room, but so was Mitya and everyone else. I was kind of in the corner, but not completely. But then as we further refined them, I would sit in a room with 3 or 4 people as I guided them through the first 2 or 3 PBIs, and then I would let them do it. So is that training? Yeah, it's mentorship, coaching kind of thing. We'd go to a sprint review and a retrospective. Well, the first sprint review and the first retrospective, I tend to take the lead in facilitating the meeting. By the second or third sprint review, the second or third retrospective, and the same is true for sprint planning, I'm taking a back seat to the extent I can, right? So I'm constantly backing away. And so with time, after a few sprints, most of my time and energy is spent, like Mitya talked about how we were constantly having to go talk to other managers and managing other managers and dealing with organizational aspects. I would be dealing with that kind of thing while also occasionally helping people with this or that technical thing. But these were all very sharp people. So I'm just trying to get the engine started, and my role over time is different than it is when it starts. And what I didn't talk about here is the truth is this wasn't the only team the only teams I was helping. I was helping some other teams. It's just that I spent, say, 80 or 90% of my capacity with Mitya's folks.
Yeah.
Is that any questions on that? That's a long answer.
No, actually, that was pretty good.
Okay. We've got time for maybe another question.
Yeah, folks, it's another question perhaps. We'll wrap up in 5.
I'll try something. For either of you, if you're talking to your mother about this, your grandmother, what would you say is the main story or the headline from all of this about people and doing it next time and what you would share? I guess I don't mean someone who doesn't know anything about software and delivering. I mean someone who is interested in kind of what it all means.
Structure drives culture. To the extent we dealt with structure and created good soil conditions for the teams to be healthy, they were healthy. They grew well. To the extent that we failed to do that, failed to prepare the soil as deeply as I should have, or as I should have helped them do so, to that extent, we suffered. So our success and our failures were directly correlated to the degree to which organizational structure and incentive structure and incentives around that were addressed.
And as your grandmother, I have to ask you, James, what would you do, or what would you bring to the next one from this insight?
I believe I think what I would do is run the equivalent of a certified LeSS for executives course. That is to say, I would get the senior management in a room for several days, do the system modeling where they think through how organizational design elements influence each other and how that influences culture, and put them in a situation where when I got buy-in, I didn't have just buy-in from 1 or 2 people, but I had, kind of a collective buy-in and somewhat of a commitment so that it's harder for them to back out of it. If I had the skill and the wisdom at the time, going back, I don't believe I'd had the skill or the wisdom at the time to do so. But if I did, and if I did it again, that's what I would do, or I would try to do. Now the question is, will that blow up on you? And I don't have I'm not real comfortable with, is that the best thing or not? And what's interesting is, like, Craig is definitely on the do that up front, and if they don't want to adopt this, well, that's fine. He'll go do something else. Whereas boss seems to be more on the let's slowly boil the frog, which what we did was kind of slowly boil the frog. And perhaps had I tried to do too much up front, I wouldn't have gotten the buy-in, and I simply would have been gone within a month. And the success that we did achieve would never have been achieved. So I don't know the answer. I know that I'm leaning progressively towards let's see how much alignment we can get up front and do a better job than I did do. And if that had happened, then it would have been very hard for this person to have continued to demonstrate passive aggressive behaviors. It probably would have been, they either would have been brought on board or it would have been very clear to everyone and that person would have been dealt with. And the other thing I wonder about, and I don't know, is would the optics that were going on up here, if they had seen this person doing, had I helped this person better qualify and justify why we're doing all these things, would that have protected my SVP so that he could then have protected me? I don't know. And again, some of this is there were hurricanes and not all of this was within, it's happening way, way up here. And, these are not, people are not in the same building, so, there's so many levels up. This guy is in charge of like 4,000 people, but he's still like 3 or 4 people from the top, so, okay. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting and helpful and thought provoking. Thanks.
Oh, Mitya, what would you do differently?
Well, maybe to answer the question directly about how would I tell it to my grandmother, I would say that at least the way I saw it was this was always about people's experience, and that translates into everything. That translates into product quality. That translates into enthusiasm or willingness to refactor code, throw away code, rewrite code, to take on things that are difficult now but are important for next cycle. And a lot of that happened. So that's what I would tell my grandmother. This was about people's experience. And this really, when James and I first had conversations about this, and when I tried to explain to him that we don't do Scrum in firmware, really when I started listening, and is when he was starting to explain the when you really implement this framework, you give engineers freedom from things like overestimating what by when, so that they don't look like they're late, or underestimating, so that they don't look like they're taking a long time, right? And then working unnecessarily because they committed something that 1 month is too long. I'll just say 3 weeks. So things like this, it's in in everything. It was about people, and it translated into everything else.
Well, folks, thank you very much. Mitya, thank you very much for coming out and being James's wingman on this. We're going to probably have to wrap this up at this hour because it's getting late and people are pinging me privately. So why don't we thank Cumulative? This is a small group, so let's just give the thanks to James and Mitya for coming out of this late hour and sharing their experience, their wisdom with us. The recording hopefully will be all successful, and if so, then available shortly, like probably by tomorrow. And I pinged you the link. to where it's going to be posted, along with James's and Mika's deck that they used, and also any additional assets that they will provide. I'll be happy to share with everyone.
There is no deck. The deck is the case study.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was actually, I was not quite sure if that was just a
Yeah.
web page or was okay. So I will reset. We will include the case study link directly in the communication. So, and I recommend that if you have any questions for James, please reach out directly. He's fully transparent on LinkedIn, and also I'll provide his personal information. I'll include it in the.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks everyone for this
I know
great
you
interactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as you are, covered and obscure, we understand why. We appreciate why. We'd rather have this honest, unsanitized, and slightly obscured with the name as opposed to PR'd and lobbied with your face on it, but without truth. So
Absolutely.
you guys did it.
Absolutely. And most importantly, thanks, James, for taking me on this journey, a few years ago. And I really just wish for more of experiences like this.
Me too. It's been a privilege.
All right, folks.
have you
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Thank
Don't
you.
be safe. Stuff like that. Okay. See you. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.